I have watched enough lives unfold to know the big moments rarely announce themselves. They come wrapped in ordinary light, a train platform, a stranger's hand, a choice made in seconds that echoes for decades. I saw one such moment in the fall of 1876 in a Nevada town most people have never heard of. The woman stood on the train steps, one hand on the rail, the other clutching a crumpled ticket. Below her, a man in a dust-covered hat had seized her wrist. Neither moved. Steam hissed from the engine. The conductor checked his watch. His fingers were rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle. She looked at his face, sunburned, young, eyes like winter sky. "Don't go," his voice cracked. "Not yet." The train whistle screamed. She had a ticket to Boston in her pocket, a trunk of failed dreams at her feet, and a stranger begging her to stay for reasons she did not understand. If this story touches you, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you've been enjoying these stories, consider subscribing. Your support helps us keep sharing moments that remind us we're not alone. The platform boards vibrated beneath her boots. The engine hissed, steam rolling across the weathered planks in thick white clouds that smelled of coal and hot iron. Wilhelmina looked down at his hand. The knuckles were scarred. Dirt lined the creases of his palm. These were not the hands of a Boston gentleman, soft, manicured, reaching for her father's money before reaching for her. "I've watched you." His voice came out rough, uneven. "For weeks, every morning you walked to the schoolhouse with a book under your arm. You read while you walked. Almost hit Mr. Harmon's cart once." Her throat tightened. "I saw you stand in front of those men on the school board. They were twice your size. You didn't bow. You didn't apologize." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving beneath sun-darkened skin. "I've never seen anyone like you." The conductor's voice cut through the steam. 3 minutes, folks. All aboard." His grip loosened, not releasing her, just giving her room. "I know what I am." His eyes dropped to his boots, caked with mud and manure. A cowhand. 40 acres that barely break even. Hands that don't know how to hold a pen proper. He looked up again. "But I couldn't let you leave without telling you. If you go back to Boston, I'll think about you every day for the rest of my life. And I'll never know if I could have—" He stopped. The words hung between them, unfinished, behind her. The train's wheels groaned, a slow, grinding sound. Metal on metal. "Ma'am," the conductor touched her elbow. "We're moving." The platform began to slide, an inch, then 2. Wilhelmina turned. The train car loomed above her wooden seats, visible through dusty windows. Passengers settling in for the long journey east. Back to drawing rooms and expectations. Back to the man her mother had chosen. Back to a life where she would smile and nod and slowly disappear. She looked at Daniel. He stood with his arms at his sides now, hat crushed in his fists, not reaching for her, not begging, just waiting. The wheels turned faster. The platform pulled away. She stepped down. One boot hit the wooden boards, then the other. The train picked up speed beside her, wind from the cars whipping loose strands of hair across her face. Her trunk tumbled from the steps. The leather straps snapped. Dresses spilled across the platform, gray wool, white cotton, blue silk spreading like water across the weathered wood. The last car passed. The red lantern on its back grew smaller, and then silence. Just the wind, the creak of the station sign, and a man she barely knew, staring at her like she had just done something impossible. The train whistle screamed. Wilhelmina stood on the iron step, one hand gripping the rail, the other still holding the crumpled ticket. The conductor shifted behind her, his watch chain catching the last of the daylight. "Ma'am, we're moving." Below her, Daniel had released her wrist. He stood with his arms at his sides, hat in his hands now, turning the brim in slow circles. Dust settled on his shoulders. His chest still heaved from running. He did not reach for her again. The train shuddered. A deep groan ran through the iron beneath her feet. The wheels began to turn slow, grinding against the rails. Wilhelmina looked at Daniel. She looked at the train car behind her. The wooden seats, the window that would show her the desert disappearing, mile by mile, until Boston swallowed her again. Until the drawing rooms and the expectations and the man her mother had chosen pressed in from all sides. She looked back at Daniel. He was not begging. His jaw was set, the muscles tight beneath his sunburned skin. But his eyes, those winter sky eyes, held something raw, something unguarded. He was waiting. The wheels turned faster. The platform began to slide away. "Ma'am!" The conductor's hand touched her elbow. Wilhelmina stepped down. Not a jump, not a stumble. One step, then another, her boots finding each iron rung as the train picked up speed beside her. Wind from the moving cars whipped her hair loose from its pins. Strands caught across her face, across her mouth. Her trunk hit the platform. The leather strap snapped. The lid flew open. Dresses tumbled across the weathered boards, gray wool, blue cotton, white petticoats spreading like spilled milk. Her mother's ivory comb skittered toward the edge, stopped against a nailhead. The train pulled away. Smoke rolled across the platform, thick and black, carrying the smell of burning coal. Wilhelmina stood in the middle of it, her chest heaving, her ticket still clutched in her fist. The paper was damp, useless now. The last car passed. The red lantern on its back grew smaller, smaller, until it was a pinprick swallowed by the desert. Silence. Just the wind, the creak of the station sign swinging on its chains. The distant bark of a dog somewhere in town. Daniel moved first. He knelt beside her trunk, his knees pressing into the dust. His hands, those rough, calloused hands, gathered her scattered clothes without comment. He folded the gray dress, tucking the sleeves in the way a man folds a work shirt. Practical, no hesitation. His fingers paused on a book that had fallen spine up, on the education of women. He looked at the title for a long moment. His thumb traced the worn gold lettering. Then he set it gently into the trunk, face up this time, and closed the lid. "You can change your mind." His voice was quiet, rough at the edges, like he had not used it much today. "Any time. I won't hold you." Wilhelmina's throat was dry. "You just did." Daniel looked up. A small crease appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "No." He stood, lifting her trunk by its broken strap. "You chose to stay. Different thing." He began walking toward the town. Wilhelmina's legs did not move. The platform boards were solid beneath her boots. But something in her chest felt unmoored, floating. She had just watched her ticket back to safety disappear into the Nevada desert. She had nothing now. No job, no room, no plan. "You coming?" Daniel had stopped at the edge of the platform. Her trunk balanced on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. The setting sun behind him turned his silhouette dark. Featureless, she walked. The main street of Hawthorne stretched ahead, dirt packed hard from wagon wheels and horse hooves. Buildings lined both sides, wooden storefronts with painted signs fading in the desert sun. A general store, a saloon with its doors propped open, piano music drifting out, a blacksmith shop, the forge still glowing orange through the open door. Daniel turned down a side street. The building at the end was narrower than the others, 2 stories tall, with a wooden sign that read, Jennings Dressmaking and Boarding. Bolts of fabric showed through the front window, calico, gingham, dark wool for winter coats. Daniel climbed the 3 steps to the door and knocked. Footsteps inside, heavy, purposeful. The door swung open. A woman stood in the frame, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, gray hair pulled back tight, lines around her mouth and eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. Her gaze moved from Daniel to Wilhelmina, traveling from boots to hair and back again, with the efficiency of someone who had learned to measure people quickly. Mr. Walker, her voice was dry, cracked like old leather. What have you brought me? A teacher, ma'am. Daniel set the trunk down on the porch. She needs a room. The woman's eyebrows rose. A teacher? She crossed her arms. This town just ran off its last teacher. Wilhelmina straightened her shoulders. I know. That was me. Silence. The woman's mouth pressed into a thin line. Her eyes narrowed, studying Wilhelmina's face the way a horse trader studies an animal of uncertain temperament. Then she laughed. A short, rough sound, like a cough that had been surprised into something else. She stepped back from the doorway, jerking her chin toward the dim interior. Come in, then. Back room's empty, and I need someone who can read to help with my accounts. Wilhelmina hesitated on the threshold. Inside, she could smell beeswax and wool and the sharp bite of lye soap. A sewing machine sat near the window, its iron treadle gleaming in the fading light. I'm Martha Jennings. The woman was already walking toward the back of the shop. Supper's in an hour. You eat what I cook, or you don't eat. A face appeared behind the curtain, separating the shop from the living quarters. Young, round, curious. A girl, maybe 12 years old, with braids hanging over her shoulders and ink stains on her fingers. Her eyes locked onto Wilhelmina with an intensity that made the back of Wilhelmina's neck prickle. Mama, the girl said, not looking away. Is she the one who got fired for teaching girls to do sums? The needle slipped. Wilhelmina hissed through her teeth as the point pierced the pad of her thumb. A bead of blood welled up, dark against the white muslin in her lap. You're holding it wrong again. Lucy appeared at her elbow, braids swinging. Mama says you got to pinch closer to the tip, like this. The girl's small fingers demonstrated the motion quick, precise, practiced since childhood. Wilhelmina watched and tried again. The needle wobbled. The stitch came out crooked. 1 week since she had stepped off that train, and her hands still betrayed her. In Boston, she had held pens, books, teacups with painted roses. Here, she gripped needles and account ledgers and bars of lye soap that left her skin raw and cracked. The shop smelled of beeswax and wool and the sharp bite of starch. Mrs. Jennings's sewing machine clicked steadily in the corner, the iron treadle pumping beneath her foot as she fed dark fabric under the needle. Bolts of calico lined the walls, blue gingham, red checks, plain brown cotton for work dresses. Wilhelmina set aside the muslin and turned to the ledger on the counter. Numbers. These, at least, she understood. 14 yards of wool flannel, she read aloud, dipping her pen. Sold to Mrs. Carter, $2.10. Mrs. Jennings called out more figures without looking up. Wilhelmina wrote them down, her handwriting filling the page in neat columns. Her thumb throbbed where the needle had pierced it. How many books have you read? Lucy had climbed onto the stool beside her, chin propped on ink-stained fists. The girl asked this question at least twice a day. I don't know exactly. Perhaps 300. 300. Lucy's eyes went round. That's more than everybody in this whole town put together. I doubt that. It's true. I counted the books at the general store. 17. And Mr. Paulson can't even read half of them. Wilhelmina smiled despite herself. She blotted the page and set down her pen. Miss Wilhelmina. Lucy leaned closer, lowering her voice. Is Mr. Walker your beau? The question caught her off guard. No, we barely know each other. Then how come he comes by every day at 5 o'clock? He brings apples, sometimes flowers. He never comes inside, though. Just stands on the porch and talks to you through the window. The sewing machine stopped. Mrs. Jennings was watching now, hands still on the fabric, expression unreadable, a thin smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Man's been doing that for months, she said. Long before you got here, he used to stand across the street every morning and watch you walk to the schoolhouse. Never said a word. Just watched. Wilhelmina's pen slipped, leaving a blot of ink on the page. 3 months, Mrs. Jennings continued. I reckon he was working up the courage. Some men take their time, better than the ones who rush in and make a mess of things. The clock on the wall read 10 minutes to 5. Wilhelmina turned back to the ledger, but the numbers blurred. 3 months. He had watched her for 3 months without speaking, without approaching, without a knock at the door. She did not look up. She heard Mrs. Jennings rise, heard the creak of floorboards, heard the door swing open and the smell of autumn air rush in. Mr. Walker? Ma'am? His voice low and rough. I brought these for the house. Apples again? Mrs. Jennings sounded amused. You trying to turn us all into pies? They're good this year. The rain came right for once. A pause. I figure the late frost hurt things some, but we managed. Lost a few head of cattle over the summer, but he stopped himself. Anyway, these are from the orchard. Wilhelmina heard the rustle of a basket changing hands, then footsteps retreating, the door closing. She looked up. Mrs. Jennings stood by the window, a basket of red apples in her arms. Through the glass, Wilhelmina could see Daniel walking away, his long stride carrying him toward the edge of town. He didn't stay. He never stays. Mrs. Jennings set the basket on the counter. Just drops off whatever he's brought and leaves. Every day for a week now. Same time, same routine. She picked up an apple and polished it against her apron. Man's got patience. I'll give him that. Lucy grabbed an apple and bit into it, juice running down her chin. Miss Wilhelmina, Mr. Walker looks at you the way our dog looks at a ham bone. Lucy. Mrs. Jennings's voice cracked like a whip. Wilhelmina laughed. The sound surprised her short, rough, nothing like the polished laugh she had learned in Boston drawing rooms. It's all right, Mrs. Jennings. She picked up her pen again. At least a dog is loyal. The week passed in rhythm she had not expected. Mornings, the ledger, the accounts, Mrs. Jennings calling out numbers while the sewing machine hummed. Wilhelmina's handwriting filled page after page, dresses ordered, fabrics sold, payments received. Her fingers ached from gripping the pen, and her thumb still bore the marks of needle pricks that would not quite heal. Afternoons Lucy at her elbow, asking question. How do you spell circumstance? What's the longest word you know? Can you teach me to write my name in fancy letters? 5 o'clock, Daniel at the door. Apples, wild sage tied with string, once a jar of honey from hives at the edge of his property. He never came inside. He spoke to her through the window, his hat in his hands, his voice careful. Weather's turning. Yes. Nights are getting cold. I reckon winter'll come early this year. I've noticed. You need anything? Extra blankets, firewood. Mrs. Jennings has plenty. He would nod, turn, walk away, and Wilhelmina would watch him go. Something tight in her chest that she could not name. On the 7th evening, he asked a different question. Would you come to supper at my place? She was standing at the window, the late afternoon light turning the dust motes gold. His face was half in shadow, the brim of his hat cutting across his eyes. Supper. I cook. He shifted his weight, color creeping up his neck. Nothing fancy, just food. She should say no. A woman alone, going to a man's home, the tongues in this town would wag for weeks. What time? His whole body seemed to exhale. 6, I'll come fetch you. The ranch was smaller than she had imagined. A wooden house, 1 story, with a porch that sagged on the left side where a beam had rotted through. A barn behind it, weathered gray, the doors hanging slightly crooked. Fences stretched toward distant mountains, but several posts leaned at angles, and gaps showed where wire had broken. Daniel helped her down from the buggy. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. Place needs work, he said, following her gaze. Lost some money last year when the cattle prices dropped. And the summer drought didn't help none, but I figure I'll get it fixed up come spring. Inside, the house was clean but spare. A table with 4 chairs, though only one showed signs of use. A cast-iron stove with a fire already burning. A single photograph on the wall, a man and woman, standing before this same porch. Unsmiling, formal. My folks, Daniel said, before Pa passed. Wilhelmina studied the photograph. The woman had Daniel's eyes, that same winter sky blue, pale and clear. He moved to the stove, stirring something in a pot. The smell filled the small space. Beef, onions, something earthy like root vegetables. Sit down, please. She sat. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and set it before her. Poured coffee from a battered pot into a tin cup, set that beside the bowl. Then he poured his own coffee and sat across from her. He did not eat. She looked at the stew, steam rising. Looked at him. You're not eating, you first. She picked up her fork. The beef was tender, falling apart at the touch. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. Only then did he pick up his own fork. Something shifted in her chest. The men in Boston ate first, talked first, decided first. She had sat through 100 dinners where her plate grew cold, while they debated politics and money. Daniel ate in silence, his eyes on his food. When she reached for his coffee, he glanced up, then down again. "I'm not good at talking," he said finally. "Pa always said a man should say less and do more. And what do you plan to do?" He set down his fork. His hands rested on the table, palms down. "Prove I'm worth your time." The fire crackled. Outside, a horse nickered in the barn. Wilhelmina opened her mouth to respond and stopped. Through the cab window, she saw movement on the road. A rider approaching, moving fast, dust rising behind. Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. His jaw tightened. "That's the mail courier." His voice had changed, harder. "He only comes out this far when there's trouble." The letter had been nothing. A bill from the feed store in Carson City. Daniel had laughed when he opened it, a short, rough sound, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The courier had ridden off without another word, and Wilhelmina had finished her stew while the fire crackled and the tension bled out of the room. That was a month ago. Now she sat on the porch of the dress shop, a book open in her lap, watching the afternoon light stretch long across the dirt street. The cover was worn, the spine cracked, the pages yellowed at the edges. Poems of the West. Daniel had brought it 3 weeks ago, found at the general store between a farmer's almanac and a Bible with a torn cover. "I don't know if you like poetry," he had said, turning his hat in his hands. "But it had West in the title, and I figured you might." She turned a page now, but the words blurred. Inside. Lucy was practicing her letters at the counter, tongue poking between her lips as she traced each curve. The girl could write her full name in cursive now, Lucy Ann Jennings, with loops that only wobbled slightly at the ends, hoofbeats. Wilhelmina looked up. Daniel rode down the main street on his sorrel mare, dust rising behind him in a golden cloud. He wore his work clothes, brown trousers, a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, the same battered hat he always wore, but he had shaved. She could see the clean line of his jaw from 20 feet away. He stopped at the porch steps and swung down. "Evening, evening." He stood there, hat in his hands, turning the brim. She had learned this meant he wanted to say something, but could not find the words to start. "There's a hill," he nodded toward the west edge of town. "Past the old Miller claim. You can see the whole valley from up there." "I know. I saw it from the schoolhouse window. The sunset's better from the top." He shifted his weight. "If you wanted to see it, with me." She closed the book. "I'd need to tell Mrs. Jennings." "Already asked her." Color crept up his neck. "She said you worked too hard and could use the air." The mare was gentle, her gait smooth as they rode out of town. Daniel sat behind Wilhelmina, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. She could feel the warmth of his chest against her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the smell of him leather, hay. Something like sage filled her senses. Neither of them spoke. The hill rose gradual from the desert floor, covered in sagebrush and the first yellow blooms of autumn wildflowers. Daniel guided the horse up a narrow trail that wound between boulders, the mare's hooves crunching on loose gravel. At the top, he helped her down. The valley spread below them, gold and amber in the late light. The town was a cluster of wooden buildings, small as a child's toys. Beyond it, the desert stretched to mountains that had turned purple in the distance. Daniel tied the mare to a twisted juniper and walked to a flat rock at the edge of the overlook. He sat, leaving space beside him. Wilhelmina sat. The sun hung low over the mountains, swollen and red. The sky around it burned orange, fading to pink, fading to a blue so deep it was almost violet. Colors shifted as she watched, bleeding into each other like watercolors on wet paper. Pa used to bring me here. Daniel's voice was quiet. When I was small, before he got sick. She turned. His profile was sharp against the light, all angles and shadows. He passed when I was 14. Fever took him in 3 days. Mama followed him 6 months later. He picked up a stone, turned it in his rough fingers. They're both buried down by the creek, the one that runs through the north pasture. I'm sorry. He shook his head. It was a long time ago. 15 years now. He threw the stone. It disappeared down the slope, clattering against rocks she could not see. I took over the ranch the day Pa died. Didn't have a choice. Cattle don't wait for a boy to grieve. The sun touched the mountain peaks. The light turned everything red, the rocks, the sagebrush. Daniel's hands resting on his knees. I never thought about a wife. He was not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Never had time. There was always fencing to mend, or cattle to move, or... He stopped, swallowed. Had a rough patch a few years back. Drought killed half my herd. I'm still paying off what I borrowed to rebuild. Some months I reckon I'll lose the whole place. A pause. The wind stirred the sagebrush. And then I saw you. Wilhelmina's chest tightened. You were walking to the schoolhouse. First day of September. You had a book under your arm, something thick, with a green cover. You were reading while you walked. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Almost walked right into Mr. Harmon's cart. I remember that. Her voice came out strange, too soft. He yelled at me. You didn't even look up. Just stepped around him and kept reading. Daniel shook his head. I'd never seen anyone like you. Someone who cared more about what was in a book than what people thought of her. You watched me for 3 months. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Jennings told you. Lucy told me, and he laughed that same short, rough sound. Of course she did. He picked up another stone, rolled it between his palms. I wanted to talk to you, every day, but I'd get as far as the boardwalk and my feet would stop. Why? He turned to look at her then. The sunset painted his face in shades of copper and gold. His eyes were that winter sky blue, pale against his sun-darkened skin. Because you belong to a different world. His voice dropped, barely louder than the wind. You read books I can't pronounce. You know things I'll never understand. And I'm just... He threw the stone, harder this time. I'm just a cowhand with dirt under my nails and 40 acres, and that might not be mine much longer. Daniel, I figured if I got close, you'd see that. See me for what I really am, and then you'd get on the next train and never look back. The last sliver of sun slipped behind the mountains. The sky deepened, the first stars appearing in the east. Wilhelmina reached out. Her fingers touched his hand, just touched. Light as a breath. He went still, his whole body tensing like a rope pulled taut. No one has ever asked me what I want. Her voice was steady now. My whole life. People told me what I should do, what I should be, who I should marry. She turned her hand, palm up, and waited. He looked at her hand, at her face, back at her hand. Slowly, his fingers closed around hers. What do you want? I don't know yet. She watched their joined hands, his skin rough against hers. But I want to find out for myself. And me? His voice cracked. Where do I fit? The question hung between them. Below. Lights flickered on in town oil lamps in windows. The forge glowing orange through the blacksmith's open door. Wilhelmina did not answer. She leaned her shoulder against his, feeling the warmth of him through 2 layers of fabric. They sat like that, until the stars filled the sky. The ride back was silent, but different now. His arms around her felt less like a practical arrangement and more like something else, something she was not ready to name. He helped her down at the dress shop door, held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she said, for showing me any time. He mounted his horse, then paused. Wilhelmina. She looked up. Whatever you decide. He pulled on the reins, the mare shifting beneath him. I meant what I said at the station. I won't hold you. He rode away before she could respond. Inside, the shop was dark except for a single lamp burning on the counter. Mrs. Jennings sat beside it, a letter in her hands. Her face looked strange in the yellow light, hard lines around her mouth, shadows pooling in the hollows beneath her eyes. This came for you. She held out the envelope. From Boston. Wilhelmina took it. The paper was thick, cream-colored. Red wax sealed the back, pressed with a family crest she knew as well as her own reflection. Her brother's handwriting slashed across the front. Wilhelmina Dalton, Hawthorne, Nevada Territory. Urgent. The wax seal cracked under her thumbnail. Wilhelmina unfolded the letter, the paper stiff between her fingers. Mrs. Jennings's lamp threw shadows across the page, making the words swim and blur. Wilhelmina, mother, is unwell. The doctor says her heart grows weaker by the day. She asks for you constantly. Mr. Harrison has agreed to wait, but his patience has limits. I am coming to bring you home. Expect me within the week. Your brother, Thomas. The paper trembled. She pressed it flat against the counter, but her hands would not stop shaking. Bad news. Mrs. Jennings had not moved from her chair. Her voice was careful, measured. My brother is coming. From Boston. Yes. Mrs. Jennings was quiet for a long moment. The lamp flame flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. That's a long way to travel for a visit. It's not a visit. Wilhelmina folded the letter, pressing the creases sharp. He's coming to take me back. 3 days passed. She counted them in the rhythm of the sewing machine, in the scratch of pen on ledger paper, in the 5 o'clock knock that came like clockwork. Daniel brought apples, then wildflowers wrapped in brown paper, then a jar of preserves his neighbor's wife had made. She did not tell him about the letter. On the 3rd morning, the train whistle screamed at 9:30. Wilhelmina was in the back room, sorting bolts of fabric by color. When she heard the carriage wheels, not the rough wooden wheels of local wagons, these were different. Smoother. The iron rims rang against the packed dirt like coins dropped on a marble floor. She walked to the front window. The carriage had stopped in the middle of the street. Black lacquer sides. Brass fittings polished to a mirror shine. A driver in a dark coat sat on the box, holding the reins of 2 matched bay horses whose coats gleamed with careful grooming. The door opened. Thomas Dalton stepped down. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, with their father's sharp cheekbones and their mother's thin mouth pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. His three-piece suit was charcoal gray, the wool so fine it seemed to drink the dusty Nevada sunlight. A gold watch chain glinted at his vest, in his right hand. He carried a silver-headed walking stick that he had never needed. His shoes were spotless. He had not walked a single step on Nevada dirt. Thomas looked up and down the street with an expression Wilhelmina knew too well. The slight curl of his lip, the narrowing of his pale eyes, the way his nostrils flared as if detecting an unpleasant smell he was too polite to mention. He was cataloging everything he saw, and finding it wanting. His gaze landed on the dress shop, on her, standing in the window. He did not wave. The bell over the door jangled as he entered. The smell came first cologne, something French and expensive, layered over pomade and starched linen. It filled the small shop, pushing out the familiar scents of beeswax and wool and Mrs. Jennings's morning coffee. Wilhelmina. Thomas removed his hat. His hair was oiled, parted precisely in the center. You look. His eyes traveled over her. The simple cotton dress with its plain buttons, the ink stains on her fingers that would not scrub away, the calluses on her palms from gripping needles and pens and bars of harsh soap. Different, he finished. Thomas. She did not move from behind the counter. You didn't need to come all this way. Mother asked me to. He set his hat on the counter, claiming space as naturally as breathing. She cries every night, you know, asks where her daughter went, why she abandoned her family for... He gestured at the bolts of fabric, the sewing machine, the cramped shop with its low ceiling and dusty windows. This. I didn't abandon anyone. No. His voice was silk over steel. What would you call it? Then running off to the edge of civilization, living in a what is this place? Exactly a seamstress shop. He laughed. A short, ugly sound. Father would be mortified. Father is dead. The words hung between them. Thomas's jaw tightened. Mother is not. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. She is dying. Wilhelmina. The doctor gives her perhaps a year, maybe less. She wants to see you married before the end. Is that so much to ask? After everything she's done for you. Lucy appeared in the doorway to the back room. Her eyes were wide, her braids hanging over her shoulders, ink staining her small fingers. Miss Wilhelmina Mama wants to know if... Not now, Lucy. Wilhelmina kept her voice steady. Tell your mother I'll be there shortly. Lucy did not move, her gaze fixed on Thomas, taking in the fine suit, the walking stick, the cologne that did not belong in her mother's shop. Who's he? Thomas's lip curled. I beg your pardon, Lucy. Mrs. Jennings appeared behind her daughter, flour dusting her apron. Her face was hard as she looked at the stranger in her shop. Go finish your letters. But, Mama, now. Lucy retreated. But Wilhelmina heard her footsteps stop just beyond the curtain, still listening. Mrs. Jennings crossed her arms. You must be the brother. I am Thomas Dalton. He said it the way a man announces a title. I've come to collect my sister. Collect? Mrs. Jennings's mouth twitched. Like a package. She belongs in Boston, with her family. Thomas turned back to Wilhelmina, dismissing the older woman without another glance. Mother is ill. Mr. Harrison has been patient beyond reason, but he will not wait forever. And neither will I. Mr. Harrison. The name tasted like dust in her mouth. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not mother, not family. You want to deliver me to a man I never agreed to marry. He's wealthy and connected. He can give you everything: a house, security, standing in society. What can this place offer you? Needlework and poverty. A choice. Thomas's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic, just like always. Am I? She stepped out from behind the counter. Her boots were scuffed. The leather cracked from walking dusty streets. Thomas's eyes dropped to them, then rose again. I was dismissed from my teaching position here because I treated girls the same as boys, because I believed they deserved equal education. And you want me to return to a world where my only value is who I marry and how many sons I produce. Your value. Thomas caught himself, drew a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, precise. Your value is in your family name, in the connections you can forge, in the children you will bear for a proper husband. That is what women do. Wilhelmina, that is what they have always done. Not me. The door opened. Daniel stepped inside. He was wearing his work clothes, dusty trousers, a shirt with sweat stains at the collar, boots caked with dried mud. His hat was in his hands, his hair pressed flat where the brim had rested. He looked at Wilhelmina, at Thomas, at the tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Everything all right here? Thomas turned. His eyes moved over Daniel, the way they had moved over the street cataloging, dismissing, the work-roughened hands, the sun-darkened skin, the dirt visible under his fingernails. He did not offer his hand. And who, Thomas said, each word clipped and cold, is this Daniel Walker? Daniel's voice was steady. He did not flinch under Thomas's stare. I'm a friend of your sister's. A friend? Thomas smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I see. He turned to Wilhelmina. And now there was something new in his expression, something harder and crueler. This is what you left us for. This is your new life. He gestured at Daniel without looking at him, as if pointing at refuse in the street. Mending clothes for strangers and keeping company with this. Wilhelmina's hands curled into fists at her sides. His name is Daniel. I don't care what his name is. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. Do you understand what you're throwing away? The house on Beacon Hill, the summer estate in Newport, your inheritance, everything Father left you. Mother will cut you off entirely if you refuse to come home. You'll have nothing. Nothing. I'll have my life, your life. He laughed. That same short, ugly sound. What life? Working in a shop until your hands are ruined. Growing old in this dusty little town where no one of consequence will ever know your name. Marrying some dirt farmer who can barely. That's enough. Daniel's voice cut through the room. Low, quiet, but with an edge that made Thomas take a half-step back. I reckon you've said your piece. Daniel moved to stand beside Wilhelmina, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. And I reckon she's given you her answer. Maybe it's time you headed on back to wherever you came from. Thomas stared at him. His mouth opened, then closed. Color rose in his cheeks, anger, humiliation, something between the two. He picked up his hat from the counter, settled it on his head with precise, deliberate movements. You have until tomorrow morning. He looked only at Wilhelmina now, ignoring Daniel entirely. The train leaves at 7. If you're not on it, He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I'll tell Mother you're dead to us. No inheritance, no family, no name. You'll be nothing but a stranger who happens to share our blood." The door slammed behind him. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Wilhelmina stood in the center of the shop, her fists still clenched, her nails cutting crescents into her palms. Daniel had not moved. He stood beside her, hat in his hands, watching her with those winter sky eyes. He did not reach for her, did not try to comfort her. "You all right?" She shook her head. Mrs. Jennings appeared from the back room. Her face was grim, but her voice was gentle. "Lucy, heat some water for tea." She looked at Wilhelmina. "You, sit down. You're white as a sheet." Wilhelmina sat. The chair creaked beneath her. Her hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs, but the shaking would not stop. Daniel crouched beside her chair. His face was level with hers, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The dust caught in his stubble. "What do you want to do?" The question hung in the air. Outside, Thomas's carriage rattled away, the iron wheels ringing on the packed dirt. The sound faded, leaving only the tick of the clock on the wall and the distant bark of a dog. Wilhelmina looked at Daniel, at his rough hands, his work-worn face, his steady eyes that asked nothing and offered everything. Then she looked at the shop, at the bolts of fabric, the ledger on the counter, the sewing machine in the corner, at Lucy, peering around the curtain with wide, worried eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The letters shook in her hands. Wilhelmina sat on the narrow bed in the back room, her mother's words blurring in the lamplight. The handwriting was different from what she remembered. Shaky now, the loops uneven, the lines slanting downward as if the pen had grown too heavy to hold. "My dear daughter, I do not understand what happiness means to you. To me, happiness is family, a husband, children at your knee, a warm house and people who need you. You are alone in a strange place. How can that be happiness? Come home, please, before it is too late for me to see you settled." Your mother, she read it again and again. The words cut deeper than Thomas's threats. He had been cruel, but cruelty she could fight. This was different. This was her mother, sick and frightened, believing that love meant obedience, believing that Wilhelmina had abandoned her. Maybe she had. The thought rose unbidden, sharp and ugly. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until colors burst behind her lids. What had she actually accomplished here? She had no job, no money of her own. She lived in a back room smaller than her closet in Boston, dependent on the charity of a woman she had known for 2 months. And Daniel? What was she to him? A distraction, a novelty, the educated Eastern woman who had stumbled into his dusty little world. He had watched her for 3 months without speaking. What kind of man did that? What kind of man sat outside a woman's window day after day, bringing apples and flowers, waiting for what? She did not know him. Not really. She knew he was kind, she knew he was patient. But she did not know if he snored, or what made him angry, or whether he would still look at her the same way in 10 years when her hands were rough and her face was lined, and the books she loved had yellowed on forgotten shelves. Thomas was right. The admission burned like bile in her throat. Thomas was cruel and controlling and everything she despised, but he was right. She had thrown away her family, her inheritance, her future, for what? A man she barely knew and a dream that grew more foolish with each passing day. A knock at the door made her flinch. Miss Wilhelmina, Mrs. Jennings's voice, muffled by the wood. I brought tea. I'm not... Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. I'm not hungry. Silence, and the creak of floorboards retreating. Wilhelmina lay back on the bed, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. The plaster was cracked in one corner, water stains spreading like bruises across the white surface. She traced the patterns with her eyes until they blurred. At some point, the tears came. Not gentle tears, not the refined weeping of a Boston lady dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. These were ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body, that left her face hot and swollen and slick with snot. She buried her face in the pillow to muffle the sound, but still she heard herself animal sounds, helpless sounds, the sounds of something breaking that had no business being whole in the first place. She cried for her mother, who was dying, for her father, who had never seen her as anything more than a transaction, for the schoolhouse and the children, and the men on the board who had looked at her with such contempt when they told her she was dismissed. She cried for the woman she had been in Boston, polished, proper, slowly suffocating, and for the woman she was trying to become, who seemed more foolish with each passing hour. When the tears finally stopped, it was not because the pain had ended. It was because her body had nothing left to give. She lay in the darkness, hollow and still. The knock came at 10 o'clock, not at the shop door at the back entrance, the one that opened onto the alley behind the building. 3 soft raps, then silence. Wilhelmina did not move. Wilhelmina. Daniel's voice, muffled by the wood. I know you're in there. She pulled the thin quilt over her shoulders and turned her face to the wall. I'm not asking you to open the door. A pause. The creak of weight settling onto wood. I'm just going to sit here, in case you need something. She pressed her fist against her mouth. The minutes stretched into hours. She heard him shift on the wooden step, heard the scrape of his boots on the boards. Then nothing. Just the wind moving through the alley, rattling a loose shutter somewhere down the street. She did not sleep. The darkness pressed in, thick and heavy. Her thoughts circled her mother's letter, Thomas's ultimatum, Daniel's steady voice through the door. She saw herself as Thomas must have seen her, ink-stained, calloused. Reduced from a Dalton of Boston to a shopkeeper's assistant in a town most maps did not bother to name. She had been proud of that transformation. Now she was not sure what she was. At midnight, she heard Mrs. Jennings's voice outside. You'll freeze out here. Mr. Walker. I'm fine, ma'am. You're a fool is what you are. But the words held no bite. Here, take this. The rustle of fabric, a blanket. Probably. Then footsteps retreating. The back door of the main shop closing with a soft click. Wilhelmina pressed her forehead against the wall. The plaster was cold, rough against her skin, and he was still out there. She had not asked him to stay, had not invited him, had not encouraged him, but he was there, sitting on a wooden step in the November cold, waiting for nothing, asking for nothing, just there. She did not deserve that. The thought rose unbidden, sharp and ugly. She had brought him nothing but trouble. She was a disgraced schoolteacher with no family, no money, no future. Thomas was right, she had nothing to offer. She was a burden, a complication. A woman who could not even keep a teaching position in a town desperate for teachers. What kind of man would want that? A small sound escaped her throat. Not a sob, something worse. A whimper. Animal and helpless. She needed air. She stood, her legs stiff from hours of lying still. Her dress was wrinkled, twisted around her body. She did not care. She crossed to the back door, hesitated with her hand on the latch. She could not face him. Not like this. Not with her face swollen, and her eyes raw and her hair tangled from tossing on the pillow. But she needed to breathe. She opened the door and stepped out into the alley, and her foot caught on something. The step. The edge of the step that she had forgotten was there. She fell, not gracefully, not with any dignity. She pitched forward into the darkness, her hands flying out to catch herself. And she landed hard on her knees in the mud that had pooled behind the building from yesterday's rain. Cold, wet mud that soaked through her dress and splattered up her arms and across her face. She knelt there, hands sunk to the wrists in muck, and something in her cracked open. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest. Not a happy laugh. A raw, broken sound that scraped against her throat. She was kneeling in mud behind a dress shop in Nevada, her face swollen from crying, her dress ruined, her life in shambles. This was what she had chosen. This was her great adventure. Footsteps behind her. Daniel crouched down. She could see his boots at the edge of her vision, caked with their own mud from days of ranch work. He did not help her up, did not offer his hand. "You know," he said quietly, "I reckon that mud's the same as what's on my boots every day." She looked up at him. His face was tired, stubbled, creased from sleeping against the wall. But his eyes, those winter sky eyes, held no pity, no judgment, just steady, patient attention. "I'm a mess," she said. Her voice came out strange, cracked. "Yep. I don't know what I'm doing. Yep. I might be making the worst mistake of my life. Maybe." He settled back on his heels, his knees popping. Or maybe not. Hard to tell from the middle of it. She sat back, her ruined dress spreading around her in the mud. Her hands were filthy. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. She had never looked worse in her entire life. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, clean, white, carefully folded. "I don't know what the right choice is," he said. "I don't know if you should stay or go. That ain't my decision to make." He held out the handkerchief. "But I know one thing for certain." "What?" "You're not alone." His rough fingers brushed hers as she took the cloth. "Whatever you decide, you're not doing it alone." She pressed the handkerchief against her face. It smelled like hemp leather and sage and something clean underneath. They sat in the mud together, side by side in the darkness, until the first gray light of dawn crept into the alley. Mrs. Jennings found them there an hour later. She stood in the doorway, flour dusting her apron, and looked at the two figures covered in dried mud, sitting on the cold ground like children who had been caught playing in the rain. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, she said. "Both of you. And for heaven's sake, wash your hands first." She turned to go back and sip, then paused. "A letter came this morning." Her voice was quieter now. "While you were sitting out here." Wilhelmina's stomach dropped. "From who?" Mrs. Jennings reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored, thick paper. Red wax seal, but The handwriting was not Thomas's sharp slashes. It was her mother's shaky script, and written across the front, in letters that trembled, "Please forgive me." The letter was short. "My dear Wilhelmina, Thomas told me what he said to you. I did not ask him to threaten you. I did not ask him to take you from your life. I only asked him to see if you were well. He told me you were happy. He said it like an accusation, but I heard it differently. You are happy. That is all I ever wanted for you. For you. I was wrong to push you toward Mr. Harrison. I was wrong to believe that my path was the only path. Your father's death left me frightened, and I tried to make you safe the only way I knew. But safety is not the same as happiness, and I should have seen that years ago. Stay where you are. Build your life. Write to me when you can. I love you." Your mother, Wilhelmina, read the words 3 times before they stopped swimming on the page. Spring came to Nevada in shades of green and gold. The sagebrush softened with new growth, pale shoots pushing through the gray. Wildflowers scattered across the hills, yellow poppies that bent in the wind, purple asters clustered in rocky crevices, white evening primrose that opened at dusk and filled the air with sweetness. The creek behind Daniel's ranch ran high with snowmelt from the distant mountains, cold and clear as glass. 3 months had passed since Thomas's visit, 3 months since her mother's letter arrived, smelling faintly of lavender and old paper. 3 months since Wilhelmina had stopped waiting for someone to tell her what to do. The back room of the dress shop had become a classroom. 5 children sat on wooden crates around the cutting table, slates balanced on their knees. Lucy Jennings, 12 now, her handwriting finally steady and sure. The blacksmith's son, young Thomas, who struggled with reading but could multiply 3-digit numbers faster than Wilhelmina could write them down. Dr. Morrison's twin daughters, Emma and Ruth, who finished every lesson early and then helped the slower students catch up, and Samuel Reeves, whose father had been skeptical until he heard his son read a newspaper article aloud without stumbling over a single word. 2 other families had refused to let their children attend. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, the banker's son. They passed Wilhelmina on the street without speaking, their eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible. She had learned not to mind. Wilhelmina stood at the head of the makeshift table, a piece of chalk in her hand, writing a sentence on the small slate board Mrs. Jennings had mounted on the wall. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Who can tell me the rhyme pattern? Lucy's hand shot up. Plain rhymes with Spain and rain. Good. And why do poets use rhyme? Young Thomas scratched his ear with his chalk. Because it sounds nice. Because it helps us remember. Wilhelmina underlined the rhyming words. Stories and lessons are easier to keep when they have rhythm. That's why your grandmother's songs stay in your head long after she stops singing. The lesson continued until the clock struck noon. The children gathered their slates and filed out through the shop, Mrs. Jennings pressing wrapped sandwiches into their hands as they passed. Lucy stayed behind to help stack the crates against the wall. Miss Wilhelmina? Yes, Mr. Walker's outside. Wilhelmina set down her chalk. Through near the window, she could see Daniel's sorrel mare tied to the post out front, her coat gleaming in the spring sunshine. He stood on the boardwalk, hat in his hands, turning the brim in that way she had come to know so well. She walked to the door. Morning. Morning. He glanced past her at the disordered back room. Lessons done. Just finished. The children are getting better every week. Samuel read an entire chapter of Robinson Crusoe yesterday without help. Daniel nodded. But she could see his mind was elsewhere. His jaw was tight, and there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there a week ago. "I want to show you something," he said. "At the ranch. If you're free. Now, if you're free." She looked back at Mrs. Jennings, who was watching from behind the counter with an expression that was trying hard to appear innocent. "Go on," Mrs. Jennings said. "Lucy and I can manage the accounts for one afternoon." The ride to the ranch was quiet. Daniel helped her into the buggy and climbed up beside her, taking the reins without speaking. The silence between them was comfortable now, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the easy quiet of two people who had learned they did not always need words. They did not go to the house. Daniel guided the horse past the barn, past the paddock where the two new mares grazed, past the vegetable garden where green shoots were pushing through dark soil. He followed a narrow trail that wound between boulders and twisted junipers, climbing toward the sound of running water. The creek appeared suddenly, cutting through a small meadow at the edge of his property. Cottonwood trees lined both banks, their leaves pale green and trembling in the spring breeze. The water ran fast and shallow over smooth stones, catching the sunlight and throwing it back in scattered diamonds. Daniel stopped the buggy and helped her down. "This is where Pa asked Ma to marry him." His voice was quiet. "He told me the story every year on their anniversary. Said he couldn't think of fancy words, so he just said what was in his heart and hoped it would be enough." Wilhelmina looked at the meadow. The grass was soft and green, dotted with tiny white flowers she did not know the name of. A mockingbird sang from the cottonwood branches, its song bright and liquid in the morning air. "It's beautiful. It's my favorite place on the whole property." Daniel led her to the edge of the creek, where a flat rock jutted out over the water. "When I was a boy, I used to come here when things got hard. After Pa died, I came here almost every day for a year, just sat and listened to the water." They stood side by side, watching the creek rush past. The sound filled the meadow, not loud, but constant, like a heartbeat. Daniel took a breath. "I'm not good with words," he said. "You know that. I never went to school past 6th grade. I read slow, and I don't know poetry or philosophy or half the things you talk about with Mrs. Jennings and the children." Wilhelmina turned to look at him. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the sunburned skin. "But I know what I feel." He faced her, and his eyes were bright, too bright, wet at the edges. "I know that when I see you, something in my chest gets tight. I know that when you laugh, I want to spend the rest of my life making you laugh again. I know that every morning. I wake up thinking about whether I'll see you that day." He reached into his pocket. His hand came out empty. "I don't have a ring." His voice cracked. "I spent 3 months trying to save for one, but the winter was hard, lost some cattle to the cold. The bank in Carson City, they've been after me about the money I borrowed to rebuild after the drought. I don't have much to offer you. I know that." He held up his hands, palms out, calloused, scarred, the hands of a man who worked from dawn to dark every day of his life. "I just have whatever I can build with them." Wilhelmina's throat was closing. Daniel dropped to one knee. The grass was wet beneath him. She could see the damp spreading across the fabric of his trousers. His rough hands reached for hers, taking them gently, holding them as if they were something precious and fragile. "I don't want to own you." His voice was barely a whisper now. I don't want to change you or control you or tell you what to do. I just want to walk beside you, for as long as you'll let me, for as long as we both got breath in our bodies. The creek rushed past. The cottonwood leaves rustled overhead. The mockingbird fell silent, as if even the birds were waiting. Wilhelmina looked at him, this man who had watched her from across the street for 3 months, because he thought he was not good enough. This man who had sat outside her door all night in the cold, because he did not know what else to do. This man who knelt now in wet grass with empty hands and offered her everything he had. She thought of Boston, of the drawing rooms and dinner parties and men who had calculated her worth like a sum in a ledger. She thought of Mr. Harrison, who had never once asked what she wanted. She thought of Thomas, who saw her choices as rebellion instead of freedom. And she thought of herself, the woman who had stepped off a train into dust and uncertainty, who had learned to mend hems and keep accounts and teach children in the back room of a dress shop, who had wept in the mud and risen again because there was no other choice. She pulled her hands free. Daniel's face crumpled. He started to rise, started to pull back. She caught his face between her palms. Yes. He froze. Yes. She said it again, tasting the word, feeling it settle into her bones. Yes. I'll marry you. His breath came out in a rush, as if he had been holding it for months. His hands came up to cover hers, pressing her palms against his cheeks. You're sure? She laughed, a wet, broken sound, half sob and half joy. For the first time in my life, I'm sure. He stood. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her so tight she could feel his heart pounding through 2 layers of fabric. His chin rested on top of her head. His breath stirred her hair. I'll build you a house, he said into her hair, with a room just for books, as many books as you want. I don't need a room for books, but you'll have one. He pulled back, looking at her face. His eyes were red, but he was smiling that real smile, the one that transformed his whole face. You'll have whatever you want. I'll work every day of my life to give it to you. I don't want things. She reached up, touched the line of his jaw. I want this. You. Here. He kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, the brush of dry lips against hers, asking permission. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing closer. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had moved. Shadows stretched long across the meadow. The mockingbird was singing again. Daniel took her hand. Come on, he said. Let's go tell Mrs. Jennings. They walked back toward the buggy, fingers intertwined. Wilhelmina's chest felt strange, too full, as if her heart had grown too large for the space between her ribs. She was going to marry a cowboy. A man with 40 acres and calloused hands and no ring to offer. A man who had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. They were halfway across the meadow when Daniel stopped. His face had changed. The joy was still there, but underneath it, something else. Something heavier that pulled at the corners of his mouth. There's something I need to tell you. His voice had shifted. The lightness was gone. What is it? He looked at her, and the shadow in his eyes made her stomach clench. I got a letter yesterday from the bank in Carson City. He paused, swallowed hard. They're calling in my loan. All of it. I have until the end of summer to pay what I owe. Or, he stopped. Or what? His jaw tightened. or I lose the ranch. The letter arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. Wilhelmina had written to her mother about the bank loan without asking for help. She had explained the situation plainly, the drought, the lost cattle, the money Daniel owed and could not repay. She had not asked for anything. She had only wanted her mother to understand what she was choosing. The bank draft was for twice what Daniel owed. He refused it at first, stood in the middle of Mrs. Jennings's shop with the paper in his hands, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. I can't take this. It's not charity. It's a wedding gift. It's your family's money, your inheritance. It's my mother's money, and she wants us to have it. He set the draft on the counter, stepped back. His hands were shaking. I'll pay it back, every cent. I don't care if it takes me 20 years. Wilhelmina picked up the draft and pressed it into his hands. Then pay it back. But first, save your ranch. Save our home. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded the paper carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart. The wedding was small. July sun poured through the windows of the wooden church, casting long rectangles of gold across the plank floor. 30 people filled the pews Mrs. Jennings in the front row, Lucy beside her in a new dress with blue ribbons at the sleeves. The families whose children Wilhelmina taught. Daniel's neighbors from the ranches that bordered his land. The blacksmith and his wife. Dr. Morrison and his twin daughters. Wilhelmina stood at the altar in a white cotton dress with a high collar and long sleeves. Mrs. Jennings had sewn it herself, working late into the night for 3 weeks. The lace at the cuffs was simple. Handmade, not the imported Belgian lace her mother would have demanded in Boston. It was perfect. Daniel stood across from her, his hair combed flat with water, his jaw freshly shaved. He wore a dark suit borrowed from the general store owner, slightly too large in the shoulders, slightly too short in the sleeves. His hands trembled as he reached for hers. The pastor read the vows. Wilhelmina repeated them, her voice steady. Daniel's voice cracked twice, but he got through. When it was done, he kissed her, quick and shy, aware of the watching eyes. Lucy cheered from the front pew. Mrs. Jennings wiped her face with a handkerchief and pretended it was just the heat. They walked out of the church as husband and wife. The first year was hard. They lived in the small wooden house, just the two of them and the cattle and the endless Nevada sky. Wilhelmina learned to cook on the cast-iron stove, burning more meals than she served. Daniel taught her to check fence lines, to recognize when a cow was sick before it showed, to read the weather in the color of the clouds. She kept teaching. The back room of the dress shop grew too crowded, so they moved the lessons to the church on weekday mornings. The pastor grumbled about wear on his floors, but the parents donated enough to keep him quiet. In March of 1878, Wilhelmina realized she had not bled in 2 months. William Daniel Walker was born on November 12th in the bedroom of the ranch house, with Mrs. Jennings serving as midwife and Daniel pacing holes in the porch boards outside. The baby had his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Wilhelmina held him against her chest, feeling his warmth, his weight, the impossible smallness of his fingers wrapped around her thumb. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "He's loud." The baby had been screaming for 10 minutes straight. "I reckon he gets that from you." Daniel laughed. Then he buried his face in her hair and wept. Martha Grace Walker arrived in 1880, named for the woman who had taken Wilhelmina in when she had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Jennings held her namesake and cried without pretending otherwise. Lucy, 15 now, declared herself an honorary aunt, and spent every Sunday at the ranch. In 1882, the town built a proper schoolhouse, one room with a wood stove and 12 desks, windows that faced east to catch the morning light, a door that Wilhelmina could close against anyone who tried to tell her what to teach or how to teach it. She taught girls arithmetic and boys poetry. She taught them all to question, to reason, to never accept an answer just because an adult gave it. Some parents complained. Most did not. James arrived in 1883, Sarah in 1886. The ranch house grew a new bedroom, then another, then a covered porch that wrapped around two sides where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun go down. Daniel's 40 acres became 60, then 80, then 120 as he bought land from neighbors who gave up and moved on. The work never stopped. Cattle to feed, fences to mend, children to raise, lessons to plan. Wilhelmina's hands grew rough, her face lined from sun and wind. She stopped looking like a Boston lady and started looking like a Nevada woman, weathered, capable, strong in ways she had never imagined. She had never been happier. Her mother died in the spring of 1889. The letter came from Thomas Formal, cold, informing her of the funeral arrangements. She did not go back. There was no money for the train with 4 children to feed, and she knew her presence would only make things harder. She wrote to her brother instead, a long letter about the ranch and the children and the life she had built. She did not expect a response. None came. But 6 months later, a package arrived. Inside was her mother's ivory comb, the one she had carried to Nevada, the one she had left on her nightstand the night she almost took the train back to Boston. A note was tucked beneath it in Thomas's handwriting. "She wanted you to have this. She said you were the brave one." Wilhelmina held the comb for a long time. Then she put it in the drawer beside her bed. Next to the letters her mother had written over the years, each one a little warmer than the last. The book came out in 1890. Education on the Frontier Lessons from a Nevada schoolroom. A small press in San Francisco agreed to publish it after Wilhelmina sent them 20 pages and a letter explaining why girls in the West deserved the same chances as girls anywhere else. It sold 300 copies in the first year. Not enough to make her rich, but enough to make her real. Teachers wrote to her from Arizona, from Colorado, from Oregon and Montana, and places she had never heard of. Some asked for advice. Some just wanted to know they were not alone. She answered every letter. The years turned into decades. William grew tall and quiet like his father, taking over more of the ranch work as Daniel's back began to ache in the mornings. Martha became a teacher herself, taking a position in the next town over. James went east to study law, the first Walker to attend college, and Sarah married a rancher's son from Carson City. The ranch expanded to 200 acres. The house expanded with it, a proper kitchen with running water from a hand pump, a parlor with a piano that no one played well, a room lined with bookshelves that Daniel had built himself from oak he cut and sanded smooth. He had promised her a room for books. He had kept his promise. In 1905, their first grandchild was born. Daniel James Walker, called Danny by everyone except his grandmother, who insisted on the full name, had his grandfather's eyes and his father's temperament. He learned to walk in the ranch house parlor, clutching the edge of the bookshelf, pulling volumes down faster than anyone could replace them. Wilhelmina taught him his letters before he turned 3. Now it was 1906. Autumn had come to Nevada, painting the cottonwoods gold and red along the creek. The evening air carried a chill that settled into old bones and made the wood stove necessary well before supper. Wilhelmina sat on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl she had knitted herself years ago. The rocking chair beneath her was the same one Daniel had built in 1880, the wood worn smooth by decades of use, the joints still solid after all this time. Daniel sat beside her, his hair white now, his face a map of lines and sun damage. His hands rested on his knees, still rough, still calloused, though the skin had grown thin with age. In the yard, Danny chased chickens, his laughter carrying bright and clear across the evening air. The sun touched the mountains, spilling orange and red across the sky. The same mountains, the same sunset. 30 years of watching it together from this same porch. You remember that day at the train station? Daniel's voice was softer now than it had been, roughened by time but gentle as ever. Wilhelmina turned her head. His profile was sharp against the fading light, all angles and shadows, just as it had been that evening in 1876. "I remember your hand on my wrist." He chuckled, the sound dry and warm. "I thought for sure you were going to slap me." "I almost did." "What stopped you?" She considered the question. The wind stirred the leaves of the cottonwood by the fence the tree William had planted as a sapling, now taller than the house and thick enough that Danny could not wrap his arms around the trunk. "Your eyes." She reached over, found his hand on the arm of his chair. "You were scared half to death. I'd never seen a man look at me like that before." "Like what?" "Like losing me would break something in you that couldn't be fixed." His fingers closed around hers. The skin was loose now, spotted with age, but the grip was still strong, steady. "It would have." They sat in silence, watching Danny finally catch a chicken and hold it triumphantly above his head. William's voice called from inside the house. Supper was ready. "Come wash up," and the boy ran toward the kitchen door, the chicken flapping indignantly in his small arms. "Was it worth it?" Daniel asked quietly. "All of it." Wilhelmina looked at him, at the ranch house behind them, warm light glowing golden in the windows, at the land stretching out toward the mountains, the land they had built and saved and passed on to their children. At the photograph visible through the parlor window, 4 grown children and 2 gray-haired parents, taken on their 20th anniversary. At the rocking chair beneath her, worn smooth by 30 years of evenings exactly like this one. Every single moment. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his mouth warm against her weathered skin. The sun slipped behind the mountains. The first stars appeared, faint and silver in the deepening blue. Danny's laughter echoed from inside the house, mixing with William's deeper voice and the clatter of plates being set on the table. Wilhelmina leaned her head against her husband's shoulder and watched the light fade over the land that had become her home. She had stepped off a train 30 years ago with nothing but a broken trunk and a stranger's hand on her wrist. She had built a school, raised 4 children, written a book, loved a man who had loved her back every single day without fail. She had chosen this life, and given the chance, she would choose it again. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one, a kind of weight that settles in the chest, not heavy, but tender. The image of a woman stepping off a train into dust and wind, the image of 2 people, 30 years later, watching the same sunset from a porch they built together with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn hope. Many of us have stood at our own crossroads, perhaps not a train station, but a doorway, a telephone call we almost did not make, a word we almost did not say. Some of us stepped forward into the unknown, Some of us did not. And some of us are still wondering, even now, what might have been if we had chosen differently. It is all right to sit with that wondering. It does not need to be answered tonight. The questions we carry about the paths we chose and the paths we left behind, they are allowed to rest, unresolved in the quiet space between heartbeats. Whatever crossroads you have faced, whatever choices you made or did not make, you are here now, and that is enough. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Thank you for bringing your own heart to it.